Leash giving me a bunch of grief in there. I just pressed the let's go live button. So let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plain of the internet. Of course, I was in the wrong tab. I was like over here before the show started. We were flipping around like, why is this not working? Where's the button at? You'd think I'd done this before, but didn't look like that today. But it looks like it is working, which is tremendous news. That means we can go ahead and get started. So let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Govea. I am a criminal defense attorney at the R&R Law Group, located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, my friends, we are talking about control. That is the word of the day. We've got two segments that we're going to get to, and they're a little bit longer, which is why we've got two of them. And for a portion of the second segment, we're really going to save that for the after party, which we'll do over on Rumble, Locals, and Twitter. So let's make sure that the Twitter stream is also fired up because Elon's in the thick of it right now. Let's see if this is working. Oh, there it is. Okay, so that's the Twitter thread. If you want to go over there, we'll also take some questions from the Twitter thread. You can see that we're live over there. So there will be an after party, which we will get off of YouTube, get off of Facebook, and hang out. But today, we've got to talk about several different wars that are happening. First is between some of the big tech companies. We know that Elon is fighting this existential crisis for free speech in America, not only America, the rest of the world, because as goes America, so goes the world on this issue. And if America crumbles, we know that the rest of the world will probably follow suit. So Elon has been fighting hard to keep Twitter a free public town square. And Apple has responded and they said that we're just going to throw you out of our store, because we are a gigantic, monolithic empire. And if you dare challenge us, the narrative, you don't get to play around with us anymore. So Elon has communicated this to the world. The GOP is out in full force. Ron DeSantis came out, made a big statement on this. He said, look, if Apple even thinks about doing this, if they take Elon out of their app store, there will be some serious consequences. And he's not alone. We've got Senator Josh Hawley, who sent a big letter over to the Apple CEO, and he said, guess what? I want answers too. Tom Cotton from Arkansas called in, and he was on the show with Hugh Hewitt, and he was saying the same thing. So the Republicans are pretty angry about this. Finally, for the first time in a long while, there's a uniform platform that the Republicans are all excited about, that the GOP feels like it's free and fair, and all of the big tech platforms are trying to remove them. So we'll go into their statements. The White House responded. We've got several clips from Karine Jean-Pierre, as well as Elizabeth Warren. She's a senator who doesn't know much, but she is going to be on the show today. We have Tim Cook, Tim Apple, AKA, who was talking at the New York Times event, and he said that we're just bridging the world, with bridges, and we're unifying whatever. So he did a bunch of CEO talk, and it's very interesting because while they're considering throwing Elon out of the App Store, Twitter, and really you, right, if you're a Twitter user, Apple's thinking about punishing you because they don't think you deserve free speech. Well, they'll allow TikTok to just rummage around their store, brainwashing kids' minds all across America. FTC sent a letter over to Apple back in June, and they have a whole litany of bullet points about why TikTok is so poorly created for American interests, and Apple just hasn't even responded to any of that. So we'll check in there. All of that in the big first segment. So we've got some stuff to get to there. Then in our second segment, we're turning our attention back over to some of the subject of Apple's censorship wrath. Previously on the show, we talked about the update that Apple pushed forward. Bloomberg had reported that Apple pushed forward this like 10.1 point whatever, you get the point, update that made it very difficult for the Chinese people, the people who want freedom, to actually communicate with each other and to further their own interests. So Apple is facilitating a lot of the censorship, and China is, also bringing out the military force. It looks like here's a GIF of what the scenes look like on some, Chinese street there. You've got tanks that are rolling in. Gives people a little bit of a concern, giving China's previous use of tanks in public protests. A little bit troubling, but that's happening. We're going to check in with some other reports from other individuals that show the Chinese are really, mobilizing all over the place. They're almost creating like these phalanxes of troops that are just rolling down the streets in their COVID gear, and it's not a good situation. So we've got that. We're going to see what the other sort of protests look like before we check in with some of the public policy professionals and see what they have to say about all this. Fauci is rewriting some of his history, right? He was a big proponent of the lockdowns. He screamed at all of us, "You're killing your grandmother if you even think about walking your dog." Now he's out saying that, well, the lockdowns, we got to be very careful with them and we have to use them intelligently. They all have to have some sort of an end game before we can just sort of impose them on free people. He's rewriting history. Meanwhile, we've got other political leaders around the world, if you want to call them that. Justin Trudeau is somebody who spoke on China. We're looking around the world to say, is anybody going to be condemning this action? Because they don't care about the million plus slaves that the Chinese have. They don't care about, the forced indentured servitude of certain populations, as long as people get their iPhones, I guess. But Trudeau, right, after he got done shoving his boot down on Canadians, free people all across their country, he's now saying that the people in China deserve freedom and the ability to protest and express their disdain. So hilarious. In the UK, they're saying the golden era is over and just get ready for it. And I think that's probably very true. Very interesting statement from the UK. I wonder how long that's going to stand, right? But we'll get into that. We also are going to talk a little bit about sort of this totalitarian framework that the Chinese have created. I came across some interesting clips that sort of connected to some other things that I think are pertinent, which is, one, we've got a clip of Chinese drones that are floating around the skies, arguing with the citizens to say, go home or else. We've got this individual, this clip is floating around on Twitter. He's explaining the sort of social credit score system that is already deployed in China. And I want to sort of use those as a jumping off point to jump into this article from Balaji Srinivasan, where he talks about American anarchy, Chinese control, and an international intermediate, right? So we're seeing the world separate into two poles almost. The Chinese are experiencing some anarchy now, and they're going to bring down the heavy boot of control. The opposite pole of that might be total anarchy, which if you look around America, you might be thinking we're seeing that. So we'll go through all of that. Then we'll jump off for the after party. I've got a couple clips of some protests that are taking place in China, but they're probably, YouTube unfriendly. So we'll save all of that for the after party. But as you can see, we got a lot to get to today. And if you want to be a part of the show, the best place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can see the web address right there. We have an awesome community of people who are chatting away over there. Big shout outs to Vienticus Prime, where it's like, where have you been, V? Hello. We missed you Monday, Tuesday. Where you been? All right, so he's back. Bonnie's back in the house. We've got Tweak I saw over there. John McGarvey. Some very interesting GIFs with my face on some interesting people. Very interesting things going on over there at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, and so let's get into the business on the day and get this queued up. A tech civil war. Is it brewing? We know that Elon has communicated to us that Apple is very unhappy with his new ownership of Twitter. And they've said that they may throw him right out of the App Store. GOP politicians are responding, saying that's going to be a pretty big mistake if you even think about it. And the White House weighs in. So we'll hear from all of them before we check in with Tim Pool and ask ourselves, why is TikTok still in the App Store if Twitter is so horrendous? The FTC sent a letter over to Apple back in June and chronicled all of the problems with TikTok. But no, they're not focused on that. They're focused on Twitter. Elon gave us the start, says that Apple has threatened to withhold Twitter from its App Store, but won't tell us why, which is very impolite of them. Very rude. Rude thing to do. It's like if your tech bro right next door has a question, can't you just send him a message? But the question might be answered today. In fact, they're meeting. So there was another post from Elon today that just came out mere minutes ago before the show started. He says, thanks, Tim Cook, for taking me around Apple's beautiful headquarters. Posted this November 30th, 1:30 p.m. Already got 3.8 million views. People are wanting to see the nice playtime between these two tech CEOs. And it looks nice out there. That's Apple's campus, a big pond, probably for reflecting. which is what they do. So you can see that's over there from Elon. Now, the New York Times gives us some backstory on this. And so let's jump over there and see what they have summarized for us. They say that Elon takes on Apple, setting up a clash. In a series of tweets on Monday, Musk accused Apple of trying to pull Twitter from its app store. He said, "What's going on here, Tim Cook?" Tweeted on Monday. Now they're meeting. In a series of tweets over 15 minutes, Musk, the new owner of Twitter, said that they're trying to nuke him out of the App Store. He also said Apple has stopped advertising on Twitter. Do they hate free speech in America? Yes, they do. And elsewhere. They hate free speech also in China and other parts of the world. They have no interest in it at all. With his tweets, Musk set the stage for a power struggle. He bought Twitter for $44 billion. Business plan is shifting a bunch of things around. But Musk and Apple did not respond to requests from comments. Apple has increasingly faced backlash from app developers for its App Store policies, become a prime gateway for billions of iPhone users. Apple collects billions in fees. They collected $22 billion, and they've been sued. We haven't really talked much about these lawsuits, but you know, the problem with this is that if you have all of these tech platforms that really have such a stranglehold on the ecosystem, almost all dollars in this space trickle up to them. Right? Everything sort of finishes with Apple. If you want to create a video game, if you want to launch a new app, if you want to launch a new business, if you want to do marketing for your company, right? You say, hey, I want to start a pool cleaning company, right? I used to clean pools before I went to law school. It would be, well, I'd have to do some marketing, maybe make some YouTube videos, maybe advertise on some pay-per-click or something. Where does all that money go? It's going to basically a couple companies, either Google, Facebook, Amazon, or Apple, right? They're all taking their cut. And Elon is saying, how about we just do a little something different? And so all of them, right, are going to suddenly brace for impact, make sure that they can collude, to use their own language, against the free speech alternative. And they did the same thing with Parler. They nuked that out of the App Store. And we were here live. We watched that happen in real time. I mean, do you remember the domino effect that happened like that day? It was crazy. Amazon pulled their web servers, right? They were debanked from everything. Twitter nuked them, right? All of it. I think it was actually simultaneously, like Twitter re-signed a deal with Amazon the same day that Parler got nuked, or like in the same week, right? It was right back to back. So you can just see all these bros are high-fiving each other. Perfect. Parler, one of our chief competitors, is now out because they all just high-five each other everywhere they go in a big, disgusting, incestuous relationship. So now they are meeting, evidently. We'll see what comes out of it. But it would be a big deal. It would be a really catastrophic blow to Elon, and he knows that, which is why he's a little bit, hitting the panic button on this and banging the table to demand that, or to encourage the public to demand that Apple don't do this, right? Does something differently, not so stupid. But it is heating up. Now, the Republicans are coming out on this swinging. We've got Ron DeSantis, who has said that if this is something that happens, there's going to be big trouble. And you remember Ron DeSantis, right? He had already taken it to some of the big corporations out there, including Disney. And it seems like maybe they are actually retreating on this. This is Ron DeSantis commenting.
Very concerning. And then when you also hear reports that Apple is
I forgot what he was going to say. So we'll just leave it at that.
Threatening to remove Twitter from the App Store because Elon Musk is actually opening it up for free speech and is restoring a lot of accounts that were unfairly and illegitimately suspended for putting out accurate information about COVID. That's like one of the main things that's being reinstated. So many things these experts were wrong at, and you had people on Twitter that were calling that out. And Twitter, the old regime in Twitter, their response was to try to just suffocate the dissent. And Elon Musk knows that's not a winning formula, and so he's providing free speech. And so if Apple responds to that by nuking them from the App Store, I think that would be a huge, huge mistake.
Yes.
And it would be a really raw exercise of monopolistic power that I think would merit a response from the United States Congress. And so,
yes, and that response is coming in. We're going to take a look at this from Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton, two senators who are saying this is going to be a big problem if they even think about it.
Don't be a vassal of the CCP on one hand and then use your corporate power in the United States on the other to suffocate eradicate Americans and try to suppress their right to express themselves.
Yeah, but Ron, it's not really that different, right? It's the same thing. It's the same outcome, either way you look. In China, they are working with the CCP directly, openly, obviously, to censor their citizens. In the United States, they're essentially doing the same thing. They're just not doing it openly, right? They're doing it surreptitiously. They're doing it nakedly, or not nakedly. They're covering themselves up in the dark of night to pass this stuff or to make these efforts fruitful. But Ron DeSantis says that maybe Congress should go investigate them. And in fact, Congress is already springing into action. Josh Hawley sent a letter over to Apple and said, hey, we have some pretty big issues that we need to talk about. Let's take a look at what he said. November 29th, from the United States Senate, Senator Josh Hawley sends a letter to Mr. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. 1 Apple Parkway, Cupertino, which is maybe where Elon was today. Senator Hawley says, Dear Mr. Cook, aka Tim Apple, I write regarding Apple's ongoing collaboration with the totalitarian Chinese government. Your continued dependency on Chinese labor. We watched many of those videos where the workers were protesting, rioting, trying to get out of their confined COVID labor slave camp. Your continued dependency, Apple, on Chinese labor not only undermines the interests of American economy and its workers, could bring those jobs here, but has once again led your company to crack down on speech at the Chinese Communist Party's behest. Apple's activities in China are unconscionable and present substantial material risks to your stakeholders. I urge you, Tim Apple, to take meaningful steps to end operations in China and to reshore production to the United States. Ooh, so bring all of those manufacturing facilities, all of those jobs back to the United States. What would that do to the supply chain? What would that do to the cost of the iPhones, right? What would that do to the entire production? Would they be able to do that even? Since the COVID pandemic began, says Hawley, the Chinese Communist Party has subjected the Chinese people to draconian public health measures. And during the past week, dissatisfaction with the nation's so-called zero COVID policy came to a head. From Beijing to Shanghai to Urumqi, citizens took to the streets to protest and voice their dissent. And he's referencing some public articles here. You see the Wall Street Journal, we've got Bloomberg, the Daily Mail, all articles. Let's see what are here. Wall Street Journal said Chinese protests spread over the government's COVID restrictions. iPhone factory workers clashed with the police at the COVID hit plant in China. Apple allows state officials to process personal data of Chinese users. And another article, Elon Musk attacks Apple Tim over advertising and censorship. They say that this included demonstrations, this is from Hawley, at a Foxconn factory, which we saw previously, in the city of Zhengzhou, one of the largest manufacturers of Apple's iPhone. After enduring weeks of stringent pandemic mitigation measures, workers protested and they clashed with Chinese law enforcement. Videos of these confrontations, including shocking images of workers being beaten and kicked by officials in hazmat suits, were widely circulated on social media and in the press. And since Apple makes more than 95% of its iPhones in China, these disruptions pose substantial material risks to Apple's stakeholders. Have quite the bottleneck that might be coming up. To make matters worse, Hawley writes, your company appears to be actively supporting the Chinese government's brutal crackdown. For example, Apple. Public reports indicate that Apple, though through a recent software update for iPhones in China, has modified the AirDrop function to make it more difficult for protesters to use this function to evade censorship and surveillance. Unconscionable though this decision may be, it is not surprising, Tim. Under your leadership, Apple has time and again assisted the Chinese Communist Party in surveilling and suppressing the most basic human rights of the Chinese people. At the same time, it appears that Apple might be importing this model of speech to control to the United States, the importation of the Chinese system. What China has done is it's software. It's just hardware and software. Cameras, supercomputers, they can process data rapidly. They've already written the code Apple is interfacing with them to make this all happen in real time. So they can just deploy that here in the United States. In fact, maybe they already have. Reports indicate that your company might deplatform Twitter from the App Store as a consequence of the free speech policies implemented by new ownership. Now, Hawley writes to Tim. He says, "You have been called the architect of Apple's strategy to outsource production to China. May not be a good plan." That was a footnote from Bloomberg. "While this strategy has yielded short-term profits for you and your shareholders, cracks are beginning to emerge in the aftermath of the pandemic and in the face of intensifying geopolitical tensions." True. Now, there's a international academic individual called Peter Zeihan. He gave a speech one time. It's on YouTube. And he said that this is probably going to be the last iPhone you get out of China, that you're not going to get another one. So if you're an iPhone user, hold on to your iPhones. "It is time for Apple to chart a new path forward. I therefore urge you to take meaningful steps to reduce your dependence on Chinese labor, especially by reshoring production in the United States. And so that Congress may consider remedial legislation," Hawley says. "Please respond to the following questions by December 6th. You think he's going to get a response from Tim? He says, "Apple has not condemned the violent treatment of workers who manufacture products in China, including with physical violence inflicted upon them. When will Apple issue a statement condemning this matter, Tim? And why haven't you done so already?" He says, "Given the Chinese Communist Party commitment to zero COVID policy, please detail the material risks associated with Apple's continued dependency on China for the manufacture of its products. How does Apple communicate these risks to its stakeholders?" Right? Hawley might say, "We've got all sorts of people in my state who are investing in Apple. And, you're sort of prejudicing their investments, and you're making these stakeholders, subject to additional risks that they don't need to be subject to." He says, "If China were to invade Taiwan, which might be likely, what impact would this have on Apple's ability to manufacture and sell its products? And how does Apple communicate these risks to its stakeholders?" Hawley says, "Please detail Apple's plan to diversify its supply chain and production networks, including any plans to expand manufacturing in the United States with U.S. workers. And finally, why, oh why, Tim, did Apple modify the AirDrop feature in iOS 16.1.1 update in a manner that makes it more difficult for the Chinese protesters to communicate amongst themselves?" Right? So rather than having to rely on the networks to transmit data, people were independently transferring data back and forth. They would just AirDrop it. Hey, take this video. Let me send it to you. Here's a list of instructions. I'll send it to you. I don't need to email you. I don't need to send you a message over, Verizon or AT&T over there. You just need to use, just give me the thing, right? Let's just AirDrop this to one another. So why did they limit that all of a sudden? Hawley says, "Please provide all communication between Apple and the Chinese Communist Party officials concerning the AirDrop update." So are we going to see actual letters from Tim Apple over to Xi Jinping? I'm not so sure of it. But this comes from Josh Hawley, United States Senator. He says, "Okay, Tim, thank you for your attention to this matter, and I look forward to your response." So that is right out of the gate from Josh Hawley. We're going to take a look at what Tom Cotton had to say, because he was on with Hugh Hewitt and he blasted this whole saga as well. But before we get there, let's talk about our friends over at 4 Patriots. Now, you know that a food shortage could be coming in the United States even as early as July. Experts have written about this. We've got drought, inflation, we've got new policies. These things are pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. You can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots survival food kits ever. This is not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years super survival food. Hand-packed right here in family-owned facilities in the United States, giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, they stack easily. Many different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. All you have to do is add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use promo code Robert to get 10% off anything in the store on your first purchase, including a 3-month survival kit of the best food you've ever seen. It looks just like this. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on anything over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. And so you can go to 4patriots.com, use code Robert to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Right here, use promo code Robert to get 10% off and start building your stockpile today. All right, so let's get back over to Tom Cotton because he's also fired up about this TikTok, Apple, Twitter conundrum that
Apple is considering
currently dealing with. And he's on with Hugh Hewitt. This is Tom Cotton communicating about Apple's threat to remove Twitter.
Respond to that.
Hugh, I think that would be a very ill-advised decision by Tim Cook and Apple. I understand that he may not care for Elon Musk. Maybe he's a little envious of Elon Musk's massive success as a businessman. But remove a widely used social media app from Apple's App Store simply because he has political disagreements with Elon Musk or the direction he's taking Twitter would simply be inviting aggressive legislative and regulatory action in Washington.
Oh, so that's Tom Cotton. Now, he's on a cell phone. I think he's calling in. But if you heard him at the end there, he says, if they even think about booting Twitter outside of the App Store, that is going to invite, did you hear the word? Aggressive inquiries from Congress.
App Store simply because he has political disagreements with Elon Musk or the direction he's taking Twitter would simply be inviting aggressive legislative and regulatory action in Washington.
Woo. All right. So Congress would be very upset about that, and rightfully so, because of course it is something that feels exactly like monopolistic tendencies. It is the cool kids in the club trying to kick out the bad kids in the club, and that's not appropriate under many different laws in the United States, which of course I'm sure Congress will dig up and shove down Apple's gullet if they have the opportunity to do so. Over in the White House, we've got Karine Jean-Pierre. Now, we haven't heard from Biden yet really on any of this stuff, so they keep sending out Karine to give us an explanation as to what he thinks about it all. This is Karine Jean-Pierre being asked by Peter Doocy from Fox News about the censorship, the potential excommunication of Twitter out of Apple's App Store.
When you say that you're going to be monitoring some of the speech on there, if you see something that you don't like, would you try to shut Twitter down?
So look, when you talk about monitoring, it is, I hate to break it to you, Peter, just like everybody else, we very much monitor the news. We pay close attention to everything that you all are reporting, and Twitter's in the news a lot. And so that's what we're paying attention to. We're paying attention to what is in the news and what is being reported on the misinformation that's out there. Let's not forget there's groups like NAACP, the Anti-Defamation League, and the public health leaders have been very vocal about their concerns as well. So yes, we are reading what you all are writing and looking at what you all are reporting about the misinformation that is out there. But, I would hope that all Americans, including social media companies, civil rights organizations I just laid out, including Fox as well, will agree that we need to, call out hate speech and misinformation.
Oh, man, it took her really a couple extra seconds to squeeze that one out, that we all have to call out hate speech and misinformation. No, we don't have to agree with your stupid premise on what those things are, because you say that hate speech is virtually everything, and misinformation has been proven in many cases to be real. So, no, we're not going to agree with you. Nobody's going to agree with you, Karine. So the question is really about Twitter, and you say that you're monitoring it in this whole situation. Well, the reason why Doocy might be a little bit skeptical about your basis for doing that is because the president had said previously that Elon Musk was worth being looked into. For what? There's no basis for that at all. Why was that something that he said? Well, it's because they're losing control of their golden goose, the thing that brought them unfettered coverage in whatever narrative they wanted, right? They just flipped a switch and boom, it hit Twitter. Every journalist gobbled it up, and it was copy and paste journalism. We used to make fun of them for this. It was like articles are just copied and pasted, literally, from one website to the other. And they wouldn't even show you the primary source documents, right? At least here, we pull up the documents on the screen. They don't even include the documents. They just summarize what's in the document in a paragraph, and they add add in a bunch of their opinion to that article, and then they all just copy and paste it across the internet. Well, Elon has broken that cycle. Now they don't get to do that, or they do get to post their garbage, but now people get to respond to it. And so if you're monitoring that, the question is, what are you looking for? And she says, no, we're just looking for this stuff like it's like I'm just browsing. Doocy? No, we're just browsing it. It's not like the FBI is monitoring this or tracking anything, or it's not like they're trying to gobble up a homegrown domestic violence extremism narrative or whatever, any of the other things that they've told us about. No, it's just benign, bland, observational monitoring. But regardless, we should be able to disavow hate speech and misinformation. Well, we don't agree with your premise on any of that stuff. So this is Karine now. Doocy sends in a zinger towards Karine. He says, okay, Karine, if it's such a white nationalist racist organization, why do you still have your Twitter account? And when are you deleting it?
When are you guys going to delete the White House Twitter account?
Why would we do that?
Well, you're saying that you're keeping an eye on Twitter because it might not be a suitable platform. So why use it?
Look, I want to be very clear here. The president has always said, and he has been very, very clear in his belief that it is important of social media platforms to continue to take steps to reduce hate speech and misinformation. And will continue to say that. But media platforms make independent choices about their information that they present. And so, look, I don't have anything to share on any policy or any changes that we will be making. We have multiple platforms, as you know, that we utilize to communicate with the American people.
So she is basically non-responsive to the whole conversation. We hate Twitter because we don't control it, but it's very useful to us, so we're not going to delete our account, right? Because all of the hyperventilating that we've seen about this is really much ado about nothing, right? It's not about preventing the harm for the misinformation, which we're still waiting to be quantified. Like, I still don't know how many people were injecting themselves with horse paste and dropped dead because of what Joe Rogan said. Do we have a number on that? Was it like 100,000 people all dead from the horse paste injections? I don't know. I don't think so. So what are the real world consequences of all of this dangerous misinformation? What are they trying to tell us? It was January 6th? That's the danger? All right. Well, how many feds were involved in that? Why aren't all of the other inquisitions that should be taking place? They want to make this back to COVID now, right? That's the disinformation. Well, look, we'll save that for the after party. But that is also a total joke. All right, so you get the deal. They're monitoring it. They're not going to delete their account. It's about control. It's not about consequences. They wanted control of the narrative. They're not concerned at all about the consequences of misinformation, disinformation, any of that crap. They don't care. They just want to be able to tell you how to think and what to do and who to vote for. Now, over in Congress, Fox News tracked down Elizabeth Warren and asked her, hey, Liz, are you concerned that the Democrats are coming after Elon just simply for enabling free speech in America?
Republicans say that Democrats are picking on Elon Musk.
Elon Musk is doing just fine.
But do you think that users have a right to freedom of speech, even if what they're saying is wrong or offensive?
I think that one human being should not decide how millions of people communicate with each other. One human being should not be able to go into a dark room by himself and decide, oh, that person gets heard from, that person doesn't. That's not how it should work.
So how should it work? It should be a bunch of other bureaucrats in a room. It should be, Sundar. It should be YouTube CEO. It should be Jack Dorsey or, Parag. Any of these people, they're the ones who should be sitting around rather than Elon and deciding who gets to put the finger on the button of nuking a Twitter account or what's appropriate or what's not, right? It's a stupid standard. She doesn't like that Elon is the person who might have his finger on the buttons. But she's perfectly okay if it's her goons in underwear doing whatever she's speculating is happening in those dark rooms. I don't know. Maybe she should ask Hunter Biden. But the point is, right, they want control. They don't like that Elon might allow other people on the field. So the better standard, rather than who's in control, is there's a baseline called free speech. Everybody gets to say what they want to say. Everybody gets to participate. If it's already illegal to say certain things like the incitement of violence and other limitations on free speech that have already been recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court, that's still illegal. Nobody's arguing against that. We're arguing against these new created out of thin air stupid standards called misinformation and disinformation and lies, right? You can't even get on and actually be like a piece of garbage, liar, racist, what person? You can't get out there and do that? Let's see it. Put it on display. We all want to see it. But no, it's because if they lose that control, they lose your vote, and they don't want that to go anywhere. So that's Elizabeth Warren talking about dark rooms. I'm sure she's very familiar with them. Okay. Wrapping up this segment, we want to hear from Tim Cook. Okay, Tim is the Apple head, and he's the individual that is evidently meeting with Elon, and maybe we'll see what Elon's up to. But Tim Apple was sitting with the New York Times, their online deal book summit, and he gets asked a question about China, and he says, well, let me answer that in the most non-specific way possible. Sit tight, I've got it covered.
I think that we have a responsibility as a business to do business in as many places as we can. Because I think business is this huge catalyst. I believe in what Tom Watson said, is world peace through world trade.
China doesn't believe in that, okay? China believes in taking advantage of stupid Western trade partner policies and spreading their power and influence all around the world. So it's great that Tim Cook believes in that. And what's also interesting about this is it's a very self-serving belief, right? It's very self-serving for him, his bottom line is to generate revenue, to be all over the place, working with even the most reprehensible regimes that have existed in modern history, to sell iPhones?
I have always believed that. And so I think we should be about not pulling up the drawbridge, but we should be about building the bridges. And so I think that's key for business. And in terms of what we speak up on some privately, we speak up on some publicly. We do it in different ways.
Not in China, you don't.
And you have to get...
You'll speak out for some of the very important lefty causes in the United States. You'll certainly do that. You'll speak out about certain lefty causes about climate change or about other lefty policies. You have no problem jumping in on those things, right? BLM, they're like waving the flag all over the place, no problem. But when it's something that might hit their bottom line, like if it might offend the people who control 95% of their workforce, then they're pretty tight-lipped about it. If it's about the right to free speech, well, they don't even talk about it. They actually programmatically remove the ability to do it. Okay, so they can talk about whatever they want. The software code tells a different story.
Your head around when you're operating outside the U.S. in any country in the world, that there are different laws. And so that's part of both the complexity and part of the beauty of the world is everybody has their own laws and customs.
Yeah, it's beautiful that in China they've got basically slave labor that they're locking in their homes, and that Tim really needs to build his iPhone. So, all right, that's what's going on over on Apple now. At Apple now, we know that Apple is threatening or is contemplating throwing Twitter out of the App Store, but they do not have TikTok out of the App Store. In fact, it's the #1 app in the entertainment category. Took this screenshot this afternoon from the App Store. It's got 5.6 thousand ratings, 4.8 stars because people get totally addicted to the app. And it's the #1 app in entertainment, right? A perfectly Chinese app run by a Chinese company. We've talked about the CEO of TikTok. We've talked about the CEO of ByteDance and all of these entities for quite some time. But this is something else that came to them previously, which was a letter from the FTC. A letter to Tim Cook. Oh, we don't have the red pen on this. Let's change this. That's a big problem. Tim Cook and Sundar Pichai over from Google. Drafted on June 24th, coming from the FCC, Washington, D.C. Now, of course, this is drafted during the Biden administration, written by somebody named Brendan Carr, who is actually the commissioner of the FCC. So this letter comes from the Biden FCC. It says the following: Dear Mr. Cook and Mr. Pichai, Sundar, dear Apple and Google, they say last week an alarming new report shed fresh light on serious national security threats posed by TikTok. As you know, TikTok is an app that is available to millions of Americans through your app stores, and it collects vast troves of sensitive data about those U.S. users. They say TikTok is owned by Beijing-based ByteDance, an organization that's beholden to the Communist Party of China and required by Chinese law to comply with the PRC surveillance demands. Through leaked audio recordings last week, BuzzFeed reports and revealed that ByteDance officials in Beijing have repeatedly accessed the sensitive data that TikTok has collected from Americans after those U.S. users downloaded the app through your app stores. Tim Apple, Google Sundar, they don't even, perfect, that's great. How many billions of people are on it? Perfect. Somebody says, everything is seen in China, according to a TikTok official. This is despite the fact that TikTok has repeatedly represented that data that it gathers about Americans is stored in the U.S. The FCC writes, they say, I am writing the two of you because Apple and Google hold themselves out as operating app stores that are safe and trusted places to discover and download new apps. Nonetheless, Apple and Google have reviewed and approved TikTok for inclusion in your respective app stores. Indeed, statistics show that TikTok has been downloaded from the U.S. Apple App Store and Google Play Store nearly 19 million times in the first quarter of this year alone. It's clear that TikTok poses an unacceptable national security risk due to its extensive data harvesting being combined with Beijing's apparently unchecked access to the sensitive data. But it's also clear that TikTok's pattern of conduct and misrepresentations about the unfettered access to the persons in Beijing having access to this sensitive U.S. data, just some of which is detailed below, it puts it out of compliance with policies that both of your companies require every app to adhere to as a condition of remaining available on your store. Therefore, I'm requesting that you apply the plain text of your App Store policies to TikTok and remove it from your store for failure to abide by those terms. They're saying your policies already demand that you remove national security, garbage, spyware, hacking type applications. You are making an exception for TikTok. We are asking you to just apply the rules as they're written. FCC says, TikTok is not what it appears to be on the surface. Right, this is from the FCC. This is not from some, right-wing blog or something. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, June 24th, not even a Trump FCC, says TikTok is not what it appears to be at its surface. It's not just an app for sharing funny videos or memes. That's sheep's clothing. At its core, TikTok functions as a sophisticated surveillance tool that harvests extensive amounts of personal and sensitive data. Indeed, TikTok collects everything from search and browsing histories to keystroke patterns and biometric identifiers, including face prints, which researchers have said might be used in unrelated facial recognition technology and voice prints. They've got it all. It collects location data as well as draft messages and metadata. It collects the text, the images, and the videos that are stored on the device's clipboard. Anything you copied, even if you didn't put it into the app, it gets. The list of personal and sensitive data it collects goes on from there. This should come as no surprise, however. Within its own borders, the PRC has developed some of the most invasive and omnipresent surveillance capabilities in the world to maintain authoritarian control. Last week's news report only adds to the overwhelming body of evidence that TikTok presents a serious national security threat. And as relevant to this letter, it also underscores TikTok's failure to comply with the data security requirements in your stores, Google and Apple. Some of the concerning evidence that we found is as follows. First, in August 2022, TikTok circumvented a privacy safeguard in Google's Android operating system to obtain data that allowed it to track users online. Okay? TikTok circumvented a privacy safeguard in Google to get more data than they should have gotten. And Google's just like, that's okay. It's a very popular app and the kids love it. In March 2022, researchers discovered that TikTok, through its app store in the Apple Store, was accessing users' most sensitive data, including passwords, cryptocurrency wallet addresses, and personal messages, all going over to China. In 2021, TikTok agreed to pay $92 million to settle lawsuits, said that they clandestinely vacuumed up and transferred servers data over to servers in China, stuff that could be both private and personally identifiable digital locations of U.S. users now and in the future. So, I mean, you got to imagine, I mean, the vulnerability, they might know. Think about if U.S. government employees are using TikTok, right? I mean, maybe they're using it on a personal phone or whatever. They're carrying it around with them. This thing could be scanning their faces, tracking their everyday movements, where they're going in and out and all this stuff. It's absolutely nuts. The BuzzFeed News investigation identified, quote, a master admin. This person's located in Beijing, has access to everything. It's like God mode for TikTok, despite their claims about storing the data in the United States. In March, a report included current and former TikTok employees stating in interviews that TikTok delegates key decisions to ByteDance officials in Beijing. They've got a .cn domain. Earlier, 2019, TikTok paid $5.7 million to the FTC for illegally collecting personal data on children under the age of 13. Parents, if you've got TikTok and your kids are using this stuff, be extra cautious. Just delete it, actually, is the better advice, not legal advice. But this is horrendous, right? In India, the world's largest democracy, they've already banned TikTok on national security grounds. Gone from the entire company. For stealing and surreptitiously transmitting user data, our stupid officials in the United States can't figure this one out. They figured it out in India. Multiple U.S. military branches have banned TikTok, including the Navy, Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Marine Corps. U.S. government officials have also urged troops and their dependents to erase the app from their phones. U.S. national security agencies have similarly banned TikTok from official devices, including the DoD, DHS, and TSA. No TikTok, but I'm sure they're still using it. RNC and DNC have warned because it's in the App Store. They're still using it. They just go download it. The RNC and the DNC have warned campaigns about using TikTok based on security concerns and threats of officials in Beijing getting the data. Citing these concerns, private U.S. businesses also banned this stuff, including Wells Fargo Bank. Once accessed by personnel in Beijing, there is no check on the CCP using this data for espionage or whatever they want to do. The PRC national intelligence law is mandatory in China. All the data's got to go over to them. They say that the concerns over TikTok are shared on bipartisan basis by a wide range of U.S. officials. Okay, look at all these people. It's bipartisan. In 2019, Chuck Schumer and Tom Cotton both described TikTok as counterintelligence threats that we cannot ignore. Mark Warner, liberal, Democrat. Marco Rubio, Republican. They agreed. Chairman and vice chairman on the Senate Select Committee, they've also expressed their concerns. Adam Schiff, chair of the House Permanent Select Committees, also warned of the risks. Ted Cruz, Marsha Blackburn, they pressed TikTok's head of policy for more data. The ACLU even has expressed concerns about this because their policies are so vague. Numerous provisions of the Apple's App Store and Google Play Store policies are relevant. There's a prohibition on surreptitious data practices, right? It's not allowed for you to go and just gobble up everybody's data. That's detailed in their policies. But they're not enforcing them. TikTok's recent statement that it was moving its U.S. user data to Oracle servers located in the U.S. does not address the concerns. TikTok has long claimed that its U.S. user data has been stored on servers in the U.S., yet those representations provided no protection about the data going to Beijing. TikTok's statement that, quote, 100% of U.S. user traffic is routed to Oracle says nothing about where the data can be accessed from, right? Yeah, so, and we listened to that when we heard from the CEO of TikTok. I think that was last week. He was very careful with his words. Can anybody access the data in China? And he says, well, the only people with access will be U.S. employees. Yes, well, or something like that. Well, that doesn't create a strong division there, does it? But he meant that basically, yes, they could without saying it. There is ample precedent from removing TikTok from the App Store. In 2018, Apple removed an app titled Adware Doctor from the Mac Store because it collected data, sent that data to China, which is exactly what TikTok does. Similarly, Google recently pulled dozens of apps from the Play Store after concluding that they were also surreptitiously harvesting the data. Brendan Carr, FCC, wraps this up. He says, moreover, Apple and Google have long claimed to operate their app stores in a manner that protects the consumer and their privacy. Therefore, I'm requesting that you apply your own App Store policies to TikTok and remove it from the App Store and the Google Play Store for failing to comply with your policies. If you do not remove TikTok from your App Store, please provide separate responses to me by July 8th. Obviously, that expired, and I'm sure they got nothing. Explaining the basis for your company's conclusion that the surreptitious access of private and sensitive U.S. data, coupled with TikTok's pattern of misleading representations, why it does not run afoul of your policies. So if you're going to keep them in there, why don't you let us know why? Because everybody else in the country thinks it's a disaster. All the military is basically banded out, and everything is obvious on its face. But no, they're too concerned about Twitter and Elon Musk because of, I don't know, misinformation or something. Absolutely insane. But Elon is, like we saw, meeting with them. Let's check in, see if there's any news from the Elon sphere. All right, so he says, thanks for taking me around, Apple. Oh, here it is. Elon closes out the segment for us very nicely. Thank you, Elon, for the assist. Says, okay, good conversation. Among other things, we resolved the misunderstanding about Twitter potentially being removed from the App Store. Tim was clear that Apple never considered doing so. All right, well, there you go. I guess we just went through a whole segment for no reason about any of this. So I guess the GOP is not going to have to go nuclear. I guess that Ron DeSantis isn't going to have to go take his elbow to the side of his iPhone. But that's good news. And I don't know that that's actually true, but I do suspect that a lot of the public pressure that was bubbling up was helpful in the conversation. So a little bit more from Elon here. Now, he was also communicating this. This is some of that public pressure that we were talking about. Apple should publish all censorship actions it has taken that affect its customers, right? He posted this poll. 2.2 million people said, yeah, 84% of the people said that Elon, or agreed with Elon, saying that Apple should, in fact, post what it has done. I agree. Why not be transparent about it? If you're censoring certain people, why don't you let us know? I mean, it's for our good, right? It's for a good reason. Oh, it's about, preventing death and destruction. Love that. Yeah, I love avoiding death and destruction. Huge fan of that policy. How are you going to implement that policy? Let's take a look at it and we can digest that together, shall we? Rather than just taking your word for it. So now Elon is also getting fact-checked by his own social media company, as you can see here. Elon posted a meme, which is very clearly a meme. He said this: Elon Musk could threaten free speech by literally allowing people to speak freely. Right? Because it's such a joke. That's the whole point. Other people being allowed to come to the conversational table is limiting free speech. How does that work in any reality? Right? But that's what dorks like Don Lemon and others have been saying. And so this is an obvious meme. And so when Elon posted this, readers on Twitter added context. They say this screen cap in this image is not real. It originated from a satirical website. CNN aired no such report about Musk threatening free speech, and the chyron has been digitally altered to add to the text. In case you didn't get it. Obviously, okay, right? Obviously. But okay, I guess maybe some people don't get it. But Elon says community notes for the win. Love it. Perfect. If community notes can correct me, then obviously they can correct anyone. This is a good example. They were right to add the label. Very easy, right? It's not even complicated. Yeah, sure. Okay, fact check me, no problem. Elon says this, now I agree with this 100%. He says, this is a battle for the future of civilization. If free speech is lost, even in America, tyranny is all that lies ahead. We'll continue to follow Elon and this entire battle. It's good news that they are not going to be thrown out of the App Store. Thank you, Tim Apple, for allowing it to continue. And so we'll continue to cover this saga. I agree with Elon. I think this is existential, and the more free speech, the better for everybody, especially those who want to censor it, whether they know it or not, because their speech will be next. And we'll continue to cover. Thank you for watching this video. We'll see you on the next one. All right, so we've got to go international. And as a reminder, we are going to jump off here at some point. Some of these clips are a little bit too, probably unfriendly for the tubes and these censorship platforms. So I just threw the Rumble link in the chat, and we're going to go over to the Rumble link when we get to these clips. All right, so we're going to wrap up when we get to some of these clips. They're not that bad. I'm just going to save them for the after party. But we're going to start here. We've got a lot to get to as the Chinese move things around. The Chinese government responds to the protests taking place all across the country. You can see this short clip of tanks now running across the streets, many bystanders, many other COVID goons in their outfits, oppressing free-willed people who are tired of being locked down, people who have played their part for long enough and have said, we're done with this crap. So we're going to listen to several responses from some of the leaders around the world, so-called. Fauci is saying, gosh, these lockdowns are pretty intense over there. These things are pretty serious. And, gosh, you should really think really thoroughly before you make drastic decisions like this, which is obviously ridiculous because he was the lockdown extraordinaire here in the United States. We've got Trudeau. We're going to check in with our friends in the UK. But let's get our bearings straight and see what is actually going on there in the streets in China. And this came over from Keola. At Keola Wong posted this November 28th at 5:39 p.m. And here's what it looks like on the streets of China. Tanks rolling across the streets, traffic stopped. We see the COVID individuals barricading both sides so the tanks can make their way to their location. Not a welcome image. We know what tanks running around the streets of China look like historically. This is another video. You can see some of the COVID goons there in the back. They're literally like purging the streets of people, right? I mean, look at that force. There are a ton of individuals there. Now, we've covered many protests on here. We spent a lot of time talking about Ottawa and Canada. We covered a lot of the Netherlands stuff. And I think there's been some others we've covered that are escaping me at the moment. But right, this is a pretty big show of force. Like they're obviously using their totalitarian capabilities in ways that the other countries were not able to do, right? In Canada, they had to deal with it until they turned into dictatorial, insane lunatics. But here, China, they can just skip that step, right? There are no civil liberties for people to complain about. There's nothing for these people to latch onto and demand their rights, right? And they don't have any firearms to protect themselves either. And so they don't even have to play around. They just bring out the full force of the Chinese government. More videos. We saw this one. A lot of people coming in. All right, so you can see that is happening, and we've got one final clip here. More tanks rolling down the streets. So again, in China, right, people who want to be free, people who want to live their lives, everywhere around this world you look, the disgusting government is just trampling over people, oftentimes just telling us it's for our own good. Doesn't matter what country, what language you speak, what religion you're a part of. Everywhere you look, the government is disgusting, even halfway around the world in China. All right, so that is what's taking place there on the streets. So, keep your thoughts out for the good people, the good people in China who don't deserve any of that. Let's close that one up. Now, there's also marches that are being conducted by the people. So while the Chinese military is rolling in with their tanks, the people are still marching. You can see on this street, groups of Chinese people marching for their freedom, tired of being locked down. And this is a pretty big deal, right? People are recognizing this is not what you're used to seeing, right? In other countries, protest is kind of a normal thing. In China, this is not a normal thing. This is very, very abnormal. And the fact that everybody's out there, right, willing to sort of literally walk across the streets is pretty incredible. And I think a lot of people are pausing to take note of that. All right, so we'll see how long they can hang out there. Now, we're going to check in with what some of these these world leaders, Fauci and Trudeau, have to say. We'll also hear from the newest prime minister over at the UK. They're going to give us their takes on what's happening in China, some of the stuff that we just saw. So we'll check in with them before we get to the Chinese drones and this distinction between American anarchy and Chinese control. I think it's a very important thing that is going to explain a lot of what the future will hold for us. And we'll get to all of that right after we talk about gold. Because, my friends, as you know, if you have an IRA, 401k, or a savings account, things are scary out there. The Biden administration has already printed more money in the past 2 years than the previous 100 years combined. The national debt hit a record $30 trillion. It's climbing. Inflation's the highest we've seen since 1982. It's only a matter of time before the house of cards comes crashing down. If you have a retirement savings, your money could be at serious risk. Talk to my friends over at Goldco to see how you can protect your retirement with gold and silver before it's too late. Go to robertlikesgold.com. They'll give you $10,000 or more in free silver when you open a qualifying account at robertlikesgold.com. Goldco is an A+ rated business with the Better Business Bureau, and they're good friends of the show. And thank you for supporting them. Go to robertlikesgold.com. All right, so now that we've spent several days and weeks understanding what the Chinese people are doing, protesting, and what the Chinese government is doing in response, we're asking ourselves about these lockdown policies. And Fauci finally comes out and is a little bit skeptical about these lockdowns. Hey, Dr. Fauci, you were the genius behind the lockdowns here in the United States of America. You told all of us that we were killing each other if we didn't do everything you said exactly right now. What do you think about these lockdowns that the Chinese government is doing? Are you a little jealous?
China's official news agency today published an op-ed asserting that the country's strict COVID measures are scientific and effective. Are they?
Well, when you want to shut down in order to interrupt immediately a process that's going on, like the spread of infection, there should be a purpose to it. Like you want to make sure you get enough ventilators or enough PPE, or you want to get your population vaccinated.
Yeah, like set like an end date or something, like, I don't know, like 15 days to slow the spread or something like that, right? It's just 2 weeks. That's the end goal. It's just 15 days. What kind of a terrorist are you? Why don't you just lock down for 15 days to save your fellow citizen? Is that the kind of goal he's talking about?
The comment that I made about their severe actions that they've taken is that you have to have an end game. What's the purpose? If the purpose is let's get all the people vaccinated, particularly the elderly,
gobbling up power,
then okay, for a temporary period of time to do that. But they have very, very strict type of a lockdown. They're locking people in their homes.
So did you.
Really, they can't even go out and, from what I hear, shop or walk a dog or something like that.
That's what you were arguing
for. A lot of pushback on the part of the population if there's no underlying purpose of what you want to do.
Well, they
Exactly. Fauci saying, wow, these are pretty serious. These are pretty harsh. Fauci wanted people fired for not getting jabbed up. All of this. Now, he didn't come out and say fire everybody who didn't get jabbed, but he came out show after show after show. We sat through it here for months. You guys got sick of it. You're like, all right, leave it alone already. You're driving us nuts. And now he's saying, wow, those lockdowns are pretty strict over there. He was praising China and their lockdowns. He was saying things like, gosh, I really wish we had those dictatorial powers so that we could do the same thing. And of course, now all of them are rewriting history as they're having to deal with reality. Total liar and loser. Now, same story goes over with this guy. Justin Trudeau, the dictator from Canada, of course, opines about freedom and liberty all around the world when he just got done crushing it in his homeland. Trudeau is asked about the Chinese protests. And as a defender of democracy and a purveyor of liberty around the world, Justin Trudeau has a message for those heroic Chinese protesters.
Canadians are watching very closely. Obviously, everyone in China should be allowed to express themselves, should be allowed to share their perspectives and indeed protest. We're going to continue to ensure that China knows we'll stand up for human rights, we'll stand with people who are expressing themselves. We also need to make sure that China and places around the world are respecting journalists and their ability to do their job. We'll continue to make.
So he's way more interested in Chinese people having their liberties and their right to protest than he is about Canadians, because they invoked the total dictatorship psycho clause that exists in the Canadian Constitution, and they imposed his will however he wanted. And they wrapped up those protests, which were done very peacefully, which were done according to the law. They had to change the law because they were getting beaten as a result of their own insane policies, which would have forced many of those people who were there protesting, many of those people who were there for the exact same reasons that the Chinese protesters are there. They're protesting for liberty. They're protesting for their livelihood. That's what the Chinese protesters are doing. That's what the Canadian protesters were doing in Ottawa as part of the Freedom Convoy. Two double standards. Because, of course, my friends, he doesn't care about democracy or liberty or protests. He hates protests. He's okay with protests as long as they're a global way and he doesn't have to think about it and he can come out here and gurgle out some platitudes for us. What a joke. All right, so that's him. Now, of course, we remember that his goon squad was out there roaming the streets of Ottawa, beating up peaceful protesters, and we covered that for a long time here, and it was outrageous what we saw. And so shout out to our Canadian brothers and sisters who are living under the oppressive regime there in Canada. Yeah, Scott Tix is in the YouTube chat. He's over here. We got Paul Minot in locals. He's in up that direction, right? Viva left because it's such a joke. All right. But shout out to our Canadian friends. We love you guys. All right. And so we've got one final clip from our friends over across the pond in the UK. This is the new prime minister from the UK speaking out against China, which is not something we hear out too often from these global leaders. And here he is saying that the golden era is now over.
We also need to evolve our approach to China. Now, let's be clear, the so-called golden era is over, along with the naive idea that trade would automatically lead to social and political reform. But nor should we rely on simplistic Cold War rhetoric. We recognize China poses a systemic challenge to our values and interests, a challenge that grows more acute as it moves towards even greater authoritarianism.
Yes.
Instead of listening to their people's protests, the Chinese government has chosen to crack down further.
Pretty interesting, surprising statement from our friends over there. And where is Joe Biden? Has anybody heard him say anything about what's going on there in China? We've got dictator Trudeau, we've got UK, we've got a lot of other leaders around the world who are speaking out against this, but not Joe Biden. No, he's been pretty quiet because he's a big fan of China. So is Hunter Biden, his son. But we've got some interesting things to talk about. Now, the jumping off point of this was from the UK. He said that China is working towards more authoritarianism, more control, a stronger technological dictatorship. And we're seeing a lot of that pop up. Now, as I said, we're going to bounce over to Rumble. And of course, we'll keep streaming on TikTok and on Locals. So I'm sorry, on Twitter, not TikTok. Don't get TikTok. Don't ever use that app. On Twitter, we are going to continue that. But we've got two clips first. We have one of these Chinese drones. We're going to do a quick clip of social credit score, and we're going to read this article before we bounce out of here. So get ready for that if you want to join us on the jump. This is a clip of Chinese drones floating around the skies all across China, shouting at the peaceful protesters, "Get back inside, stay home, or we are going to arrest you." Screaming at the people on the streets, automated drones with cameras, presumably. Now take that clip and let's juxtapose that with this clip. This clip is floating around on Twitter. We're going to watch the full thing in the after party, but we're going to watch the first minute here. This person has been to China. He is communicating about the social credit score system that's already been implemented. He's saying this stuff is coming down the pike any day now because they were prototyping this stuff years ago.
If you go to China, they're piloting it a few years ago in Shenzhen. So I lived overseas. If you go to Shenzhen, back in 2017, they already had facial recognition cameras there. So if you jaywalked in Shenzhen, they would immediately detect that and send you a notification, and they would deduct money from your what they call WeChat account. They use two main apps, WeChat and Alipay. So you can actually deduct your money directly from your account. This is 4 years ago. So this is not like some sort of conspiracy theory. It's not something that's going to happen 10 years into the future. This happened pre-corona in China. And so this system in China that exists is extremely advanced. They can detect if it's a man or a woman. They can guess your age. They can detect what kind of car model it is, who the manufacturer is. This is a sort of technology that we see in all these dystopian sort of films and whatever. And people keep putting it off and thinking that this is something that's going to happen later in my kids' lifetime or my grandkids. It's already here. And if this gets implemented anywhere, especially in a Western nation, it's not going away. Israel is already talking about the fourth shot. Then they're going to be going to herpes, and they're going to ask if you're gay. They're going to be asking if you ate 3 pizzas this week because it's unhealthy. If you buy certain books from certain countries, your country doesn't like you. You'll lose points in the social credit score system. So
very, very troubling stuff. And that's not crazy stuff, right? This is not theory. He's explaining what's actually happening and what was happening as far as 2017, right? And how much more insane have things gotten since that time. So, nuts. Now, I wanted to share this article with you. This came over from a book called The Network State. It's available at thenetworkstate.com. It's an open source book, so it's free. It's all available. It's written by a guy called Balaji Srinivasan. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it's a great article, and it helps it's actually part of the book, but it's linked up as an article. Anyways, he details what the sort of spectrum of the world might look like. Right now, we have sort of a bipolar political spectrum in the United States. We've got the conservatives, the Republicans, allegedly. Then we've got the liberals, the left, right? And we have them on the spectrum. But there's another bigger spectrum that might exist in terms of social order across the world. And we have heard the World Economic Forum. We've heard many people talk about a multipolar world. And the United States is not the unipolar world. We've got different competing powers and sort of a multipolar world where China and other entities can compete with the United States. The United States doesn't make the decisions for everything, right? So if this new world emerges and the United States facilitates this by withdrawing from the world stage, what might happen, right? And the U.S. seemingly is doing that. It doesn't matter what party is behind it, right? The U.S. is sort of incapable of continuing to extend control over the entire planet. The United States is withdrawing. We're going to see that their capacity follows. All right, so let's get into this article. He's going to detail what this spectrum looks like for us. On one side of the spectrum, American anarchy. And let's ask ourselves, right, if this is happening right now. On the other side of the spectrum is Chinese control. And in the middle, there's going to be this gray area where he calls the international intermediate. He says, all right, we're going back into a sci-fi scenario, but let's game this out. The U.S. could descend into a chaotic second American Civil War. The CCP responds with the opposite, right? Chaos in the United States leads to a second Civil War, and he details what this sounds like. The CCP will not allow that to happen in their home state. So they go to the opposite extreme, total surveillance state that traps wealth in the digital yuan network, and the rest of the world, if we're lucky, builds an alternative startup society. But he says, look, to be clear, you don't need to believe in this scenario to build any of these things. He says other people have talked about how the world order might be descending, and he's explaining the different buckets that this falls into. He starts with America. American anarchy. Are we going to have prosperity, tyranny, or anarchy? Right? Which one is it going to be? We'd all like to see prosperity, certainly, but let's see what he says. The progressive vision is that the West is getting more free, more equal, and more prosperous, if you believe that. The dystopian vision is that we're all actually in the incipient stages of tyranny, whether that be fascist or woke tyranny, respectively, we don't know. But what's under-theorized is a third possibility, namely that in the U.S. at least, the inconclusive power struggle between Democrats and Republicans really is useless. It means that America is headed for anarchy. As the events of 2021 unfolded, it became clear that even with unified control of the federal government, Democrats were no more effective than the Republicans had been earlier. Neither faction could do anything to gain total domination that their party wanted and that the other party feared. But meanwhile, the nonpartisan state capacity of the United States, which means the ability of the U.S. to do things and to get things done, state capacity. Do you have the capacity to do certain things? If you call our law firm, yeah, we got the capacity to represent you on a criminal case, but not on a family law case because we don't do that. The U.S. capacity doesn't have capacity for most things now. It's continuing to visibly decay. Squint past the pandemic's half-ignored TSA-like COVID regulations, and you saw a half-ignored TSA-like COVID regulator, namely a failing state that people did half-ignore and arguably had to half-ignore because the USA itself was the TSA, and the TSA they knew was safety theater, right? In other words, the whole government became the TSA. The CDC, Dr. Fauci, right? All of the infrastructure that's meant to save us and protect us, we all think that they're a joke now. Today, in the territory governed by this inept bureaucracy, we now see power outages, right? We've talked about this in Texas and other places. In California, right? Year after year, rolling outages. Supply chain shortages, rampant flooding, uncontrolled fires. We see riots, arsons, shootings, stabbings, robberies, murders. We see digital mobs that become physical mobs. We see a complete loss of trust in institutions from the state and the media. We see anti-capitalism, anti-rationalism. We see states breaking away from the federal government, which is what we've talked about here. We've seen this, right? Carrie Lake was promising this as part of her campaign. Greg Abbott in Texas has been pushing back against the federal government. Texas, Louisiana, suing them in many instances. Missouri saying, don't come in here and tell us how to run our gun laws. States breaking away from the government at home and abroad. At the end, we see the end of power, the revolt of the public, the defeat of the military, the inflation of the dollar, and looming ahead, American anarchy. Now, what's coming isn't fascism or communism like the left wing and the right wing pundits would have us believe. Even though they don't believe it themselves, what's coming is the exact opposite of that. A world where the civilized concepts of freedom and equity are extrapolated to their de-civilizational limit, where you ain't the boss of me and we are all equal, where all hierarchy is illegitimate, and with it, all authority, where no one is in charge and everything is in chaos, right? That we're trending towards that. We can argue that this may be preferable to the status quo, in the same way that we think of chaotic Russia in the 90s was on balance better than the authoritarian Soviet Union in the 80s. What's better? Total control or total anarchy? Because the state can't maintain order. They can't even keep the power on. And it's going to get worse, is what he says. We can argue it may be inevitable, as the Chinese proverb goes, quote, the empire long divided must unite. Long united must divide. And we can argue that this transitional period of anarchy may be lamentable, but it's better than the other team being in charge. But he says, I think that prior to our rebundling, we're on track for quite an unbundling. He says, with that introduction over, let's get down to specifics. Rather than seeing an indefinite continuation of the post-war order, or a second Cold War between the U.S. and China that many are preparing for, the U.S. may be on track to descend into an American anarchy, a chaotic second American civil war between the U.S. establishment and its people. We foresee two main factions in this new civil war. The first will align around the U.S. federal government, the New York Times, the establishment media, the wokeness, the dollar, and the Democratic Party. They'll say that they're fighting for, quote, democracy, and they're fighting against insurrectionists. The second group will align around state governments. Oh, interesting. Something we talk about here. Decentralized media, maximalism, Bitcoin, and the Republican Party. They'll say that they're fighting for freedom against fiat tyranny. Now, we can't predict their names, but rather than Democrat blue and Republican red, he says, let's call them the wokes and the orange, the Bitcoin orange. So dollar green and dollar orange. Now, he says America, right? He gives us some factors here. This is a great book, by the way. But he says, how could something as radical as the Second American Civil War happen? You could write a book on this, but he's got a couple of ideas here. One, we've got political polarization all the way up. All the graphs show this now at the top, basically, levels. The U.S. is not really a nation state anymore, but it's a binational country comprised of two warring ethnic groups that disagree on the fundamental moral premises. It's about God, gays, and guns, but it's also about censorship, surveillance, and inflation. State capacity is way down, right? The component or the competent America of a mid-century is not working anymore. The left-right fusion that FDR put together, the America that combined the powerful central state with social conservatives, right? That is gone. That America depicted in the movies, it's over. The U.S. government can't build a bathroom in San Francisco. And we made a whole video about this. It took them 20 years in San Francisco. This video is on our channel. 20 plus years to create a bathroom in San Francisco. And it's like another 5 years to finish the other two. It's over. The country is incapable of doing basic things. The government can't build a bathroom, let alone an effective fighter jet, a destroyer, a combat ship, or an aircraft carrier. Economic prosperity is declining. All the political infighting of the last decade happened during a period of prosperity. You're already seeing articles that we're going to be eating bugs and living in pods now. We have envy increasing all across the country and the world. This is normally phrased in terms of inequality, right? We're unequal. That's one way to look at it, but let's look at it and rotate it a few degrees. Let's talk about it in envy terms. The return of the great fortunes, the rise of social media, the decline in religion has led to envy escalating. Every day, people can see others online who appear to be better off than they are and who appear to be rising while they're falling. Whether that rise is real or not, whether it's due to another person's own efforts or not, doesn't matter. Everybody feels like other people are getting more while they are falling behind. Foreign military defeats, crushing the U.S. capacity. Leaving aside your feelings about the pandemic, the military propaganda is worth reviewing. In 2018, the U.S. DoD put out press releases on its preparation for the pandemic. They said, we've got very sophisticated technology to solve this, but nothing happened because the military was completely unprepared. This was the first time many in the public had the opportunity to directly compare statements about the secret military programs to the actual results. How many billions did we spend on that and where did it go? The size of the gap was remarkable. At least some of the U.S. military was just words, he says, not real, right? All of there was supposed to be competency around any of these things. There wasn't any. Balaji talked a lot about that previously. U.S. states are pulling away from the feds. We've talked a lot about that on this channel. There's enormous coverage of U.S. politics on the national level because that gets clicks from everybody. But local politics doesn't get the same attention. But if you've been paying attention, multiple states have been saying, we're going to handle things on our own. Things like guns, immigration, abortion, gambling, marijuana, and others. This part is future is our past. It's reversing the 10th Amendment repeal by FDR's government and more broadly, going back to Western decentralization, which is what we want. 7, authority has lost respect. The old American left said something like, we all need to work for the common good. While the old right said something like, pay your dues and you'll achieve the American dream. Also, turning into a joke because your dollar is inflating away every single day. The new left says, quote, we are all equal. And the new right says, you ain't the boss of me. So the old left-right combination, self-supported, self-sacrifice, and stable hierarchy, while the new one attacks all hierarchy as fundamentally illegitimate. You see, there was a nice balance. Self-sacrifice, you'll get a stable hierarchy. The left says common good protections. The right says work hard. You can balance those two. But in this case, in this new world now, that's not what we see at all. Every side says any hierarchy is oppressive and tyrannical. It's reflected in the defacement, the degradation of every U.S. institution over the last few decades. Even the founders and the Capitol are no longer sacred. Nobody cares. They're pulling statutes down all over the place. We're discussing national divorce. Secession is now officially part of the platform for Texas Republicans. And there have been an increasing number of pieces on a national divorce, and he cites many of them. Radicalized movements reject the status quo. There have been countless words written on wokeness and how it's radical ideology that thinks the U.S. is intrinsically corrupt. Many people are behind it. But the thing about wokeness is that it's not just a superficial weed growing out of the topsoil. It has a root system, a theory of history and ethics that's built on thousands of papers, on generations of academic humanists, on Foucault and Derrida and the like, and deconstruction and critical race theory and so on. I happen to think of this as a mostly evil doctrine, fact check true, as sophisticated evil promoted in the name of good, but I recognize it has ideological content. The Republican Party isn't really capable of dealing with that, obviously. They have no idea what they're doing. They can't even respond to it. In fact, many of them are playing the same game, right? Going along with it, lest they be castigated as being a bigot. But Bitcoin maximalism is, if you haven't heard of it, he says you will. It's a very important ideology that a lot of people haven't heard about. We've hinted about it here. You can read about it in the Bitcoin Standard or any one of these other books. But he says there could be a trigger event. And for Balaji, he says the trigger event might be the U.S. seizure of Bitcoin, right? And he uses that as sort of the, as an analogy to the seizure of gold back during FDR's reign, right? So if the U.S. financial system continues to crumble and everybody goes over to Bitcoin, which is probably, going to be one of the most hardest currencies that exists ever, this is not financial advice, this is not legal advice, all of those disclaimers. But if that were to happen, right? If this case were to happen and that becomes the hard money, just like gold was the hard money back then, he says the government moving to seize that money, seize that Bitcoin, would cause both sides to be in basically catastrophic positions, right? The Bitcoiners couldn't back down and the government couldn't back down. He says a U.S. establishment attempt to seize Bitcoin in a time of high inflation would be like a repeat of FDR's gold seizure, except that this would be done in a time of declining state capacity, right? The state doesn't have the ability to do anything about this. We're going to seize it. And everybody says, well, we don't really trust you. We're not going to give you anything. He says the reason something like this could be the trigger event is neither side is backing down. Wokes would have no power if their government goes bankrupt because nobody's using their monetary system. So they have to go pull the money from, or the crypto elsewhere. And maximalists would have no money. The Bitcoiners would have no money if they surrendered to the state. So something like that could trigger a literal, second American Civil War. And the rest of this article, this is a whole book. So you can read the whole book on it. It's very, very interesting stuff over from Balaji. He's saying, wars are not something that he favors. And he games out China. On the other end of the spectrum, he talks about Chinese control. He says that China will introduce loyalty. They're going to shut down opposition. They're going to create their version of U.S.-style democratization, right? So everybody gets to vote and participate in their authoritarianism. They're going to inculcate Chinese nationalism. Just like the U.S. has gone through the Great Awakening since 2013, Chinese society has been driven into a phase of ultra-nationalism. So the U.S. has gone the opposite direction, right? The U.S. is, according to the wokesters, is terrible, garbage country. But according to the Chinese, right, China's incredible, ultra-nationalism. China also is building a surveillance state. Much of this has been written, but the sheer scale of what has been built has not been understood well. While it's worth being aware of Gell-Mann amnesia, which is another concept that we've talked about, Gell-Mann amnesia is like if you're reading a newspaper, and I'll use myself as an example. If I'm reading a newspaper, let's say I open up the New York Times, and I read the New York Times and I see there's an article there about criminal law and about prosecuting somebody with a DUI or something. I could read that article and I could say, this is total nonsense. The journalist here, the author, doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. This isn't even close to criminal law. It's inaccurate, right? But I would know that because I'm familiar with that subject matter. Now, if I turn the page and I see an article about, brain surgery, and I read that article, I'd say, wow, that's interesting. I had no idea that they could do that type of brain surgery. That's pretty amazing. What a great world we live in, right? And I would take a look at that article and I would suddenly forget that the newspaper is garbage because I know that the article on the prior page that I do know about is inaccurate. So why would I suddenly think that if I turn the page over that the next article would suddenly be accurate? He's saying, okay, this is actually an area where the U.S. establishment media is closer to reality than it is domestically, in part because it's a relative to the Chinese state. You see all of the additional bullet points, but misbehavior in China, as we heard about from the gentleman in the prior video, it will get you removed from WeChat, which is like unpersoning you. It's hooked into all the services, and so if you're removed from there, you can't get access to anything. And China also might sell their technology to other governments, okay? Export their software, just like iPhones are exported or just like, technology is exported in other forms. The Chinese government can export their technology. Both China and the US have sold surveillance technology to the globe, but one difference is that China can execute better in the physical world. So smart cities built with Chinese technology have full stack surveillance. They'll point to a harmonious society, and if there's a coup in China, the US establishment calling for a coup, right, the whole world could be sort of exploding into a tinderbox. So very interesting book, very interesting articles here. And so I'd encourage you to go check that out at thenetworkstate.com if you want to read more. But that, my friends, is it for us. We are going to jump on over to locals and to Twitter and to Rumble in a minute for an after party. But before we jump over there, we certainly got to make sure that we spend some time and say thank you for those super chats that came in and hang out with the chat for just a little bit. So let's get those pulled up before we jump on over to the after party. We have a few that came in at the start of the program. First one in the house is from Miguel Rivera. Thank you, Miguel. He says, Elon just tweeted and Tim Cook and him just spoke and they cleared up the misunderstandings. Well, that's great. It's a good thing he didn't do that before I started the show. Otherwise, the whole segment would have been wasted. It's still important. The segment's still important. I think that it's a good thing they worked that out. But it's very important that other platforms like Google knows, everybody knows this is not acceptable. Ditka's Bears sent in a very nice, generous dono super chat. Thank you, Ditka's Bears. Now, I don't see any comment on that, but thank you for the dono and the support. Alan Harkin sent in another one. Thank you, Alan. Another very generous one. Says, you're very intelligent and wise beyond your years. Well, that's a very nice compliment, Alan. I don't know about any of that. I mean, it was Balaji's book that we were reading from. It's his book. I didn't write it. But thank you for the compliment. I think it is a very interesting conversation. And I think that, oftentimes on this show, it's a little bit different, right? To sort of zoom way out on these things. Oftentimes we can get really zoomed in. I think about this as sort of like the map app on your phone, right? You can zoom way out and see where you are geographically, state, country, globally level. But you can also zoom in, and we spend a lot of time really zooming in. Like we really zoom in on cases and politicians and elections and things. But zooming way out, you see some of these macro trends that are taking place. And I've always found Balaji actually to be very very interesting in terms of his prognostication abilities. He's pretty accurate, so I check him out. But thank you, Alan. I appreciate that one. Thank you for the support on that. Eddie is here. He says, I completely disagree with Alan Harkin. I personally hold you responsible for every bad thing that ever happened in Arizona in my own personal life. Wow, that's a lot, man. That's a lot of responsibility. Wow. Eddie, I mean, what have you done? We have to get a full inventory of all the things that you've done before I can give you a blanket acceptance of responsibility for that. I don't know. I don't know if what's going on over there. But I can accept a lion's share of it for whatever reason. Eddie says, as the sole individual representing the entire state of Texas, you know this to be true, Rob. I'm moving for a national divorce. All right, so I'm representing all of Arizona, which it very recently has been a loser state. I'll say it. Our politics here have been, I think, objectively loser-ish, right? I mean, everybody's going, what did you guys do with your elections? This is crazy. So Eddie's saying he's the sole representative of Texas. I'm the sole representative of Arizona. He's moving for a national divorce. We can't be hanging with scrubs that don't even know how to vote or handle a six-shooter. From Eddie. Give me grief today, Eddie. Yeah, I didn't know. You have to tell me if this is true, Eddie, or not. But my understanding, I didn't know that the Texas Republican Party made secession part of their official policy. Is that true? That was in the book that we just read. But honestly, I think you're going to hear more and more of this. The government is useful when they can do things. When they become overly burdensome on the rest of us, there are alternatives. And, a lot of this probably sounds like doom and gloom, a lot of the stuff that we read through. I really don't see it that way at all, right? The failure of the federal government is freeing us. Their inability to perform their job well is going to wake all of us up. We're all going to realize that nobody's coming to help us. Okay. The government is not going to come solve our problems for us. And I think the faster that we can sort of reconcile that, the better, right? Or the more prepared we will be individually, sort of individual sovereignty and individual preparation rather than relying on the government to solve all of this stuff. But all right, my friends, that was it for the super chats. Thank you for sending those in, everybody. I really do appreciate those. We had a Rumble rant come in over on Rumble, which is where we're going to be here in just a short minute. And so you can see they're chatting away over there. Check out the link if you're on Rumble. On YouTube. The pinned link, we're going to go over there for a little bit. Says, as always, thanks for a great show. But what's up with the Arizona elections? I thought you'd be all over it. So, I mean, they're over, right? They're over. I mean, that's it. Abe Amadei's lawsuit got dismissed because they said it wasn't ready. It wasn't ripe yet. And I'm sure when he refiles it, after the canvassing is completed, they'll say it's moot because the decision has been made. So I think it's basically done. I don't know what Carrie Lake is going to do or where that's going to go, if it's going to go anywhere. I know she filed a request for a special action. We can come back and cover that. But again, if the Republican Party is clawing for a victory after the fact, we've already played this game. We've already seen this game, right? It happened in 2020, and we covered this aggressively. I mean, we covered so many election litigation cases before it was illegal to do that on YouTube, and nothing happened, right? You've got to be ready on the front end. You can't play the game after the fact. It's hard to change the score after the game. And it's honestly shocking to me that the Republicans got caught so flat-footed again. So, yeah, I mean, I'm disappointed in it. I don't know what else to say or what else there is really worth covering because they're yeah, I mean, I'll look into it. If there is something worth covering, we'll cover it, but maybe we'll do it on a Rumble-only stream. But I think they got caught flat-footed again, unfortunately. And maybe it wasn't their fault. Maybe it was intentional sort of abandonment by the mainstream GOP in many of these races. I don't know really who's to blame for it or how to fix it, but somebody with standing, and I don't mean the legal version of standing, but somebody with skin in the game, somebody who really cares about this stuff is going to have to make it their issue. I think Blake Masters might actually do it. He has said that he thinks that this ballot collection game is the game that the Republicans need to play. And somebody who wants to win a Senate seat or win a federal national election or actually win, they've got to drive this. You know, it's not going to be Raylan Brunson, right? For all the amazing work and all of the effort, right? All of the good intentions that other people have, right? We got to get people with standing who are tired of losing to lead the charge. Otherwise, they're going to keep losing. You know, like Mitch McConnell doesn't care about Blake Masters winning or losing. Blake Masters has to care about that. So any reliance on any of the mainstream GOP, it has to just get, reconciled. They have to figure out what to do with it. So anyways, my friends. All right. So that is what we've got over from, I think we had another one that popped in from our friend Eddie. Where'd that one go? I was trying to pull that one up on the screen. All right, but I don't know what happened to it. So we'll do it this way. Thank you, Eddie. Very generous today. I appreciate that, brother. Eddie said, yes, that is true, but it's just a discussion about secession, not a vote. Very good clarity, Eddie. Yeah, so Texas is evidently saying we're thinking about it. It's an interesting question, and I am against the end of America, right? Like I certainly would not like to see the states divide, but I'm also very tired of living under a dictatorish country that's wrecking basically everything. So if Texas left and I could move to Texas and have a much higher quality of life than is provided, it's sort of your obligation to do that, right? I think that's fair because I believe in the American principles. I believe in the American way of life. I believe in America. I believe in my fellow countrymen. I believe in all the things that many of you stand for. And if the federal government is walking away from those principles, that's on them. The rest of us can figure it out and live our lives free of their influence, if that's possible, to the best of our abilities. But okay, Eddie, thank you very much for that. And shout out to our friends in the great state of Texas. But all right, my friends, so that is going to be it for us here on YouTube and Facebook. We're going to jump on over to our watchingthewatchers.locals.com community. We're also going to hang out on Rumble for a little bit and go through a couple other additional clips that I had queued up for us before we jump into the locals comments and the Twitter comments. If you're over on Twitter and you're watching live on the tweet and you're leaving a comment right here, we'll get to some of these comments as well. So watchingthewatchers.locals.com, head on over there. Also want to thank the show's sponsors. Thank you to Goldco. Check out robertlikesgold.com to protect your savings and your retirement with gold and silver. We also have 4Patriots. Go to 4patriots.com. Get your food, man, because nobody wants to starve to death when the world apocalypse comes careening down upon us. Go to 4patriots.com. Use promo code Robert. Get 10% off everything in the store. And, of course, our law firm, right? I know many of you are not from Arizona. But if you are, or if you happen to know anybody who's been traveling in Arizona and has been charged with a crime, that's what we do. Our law firm is incredible. We're in Scottsdale. We work all over the state of Arizona. We've been in hundreds of different courts. We help good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope, not only in their cases, hopefully beyond that, in their lives. Give us a call, 480-787-0394. Go to rrlawaz.com to schedule a free case evaluation online. And thank you for supporting us with your referrals. They keep us busy. They enable us to do the work that we love to do. So thank you for that. Also, thank you to the mods who mod down the fort for us. Big shout outs to Vientikiss, who is here. He's left us Monday. K-Bean, shout outs to Just Cause. I saw Lean in the house. Lean, I hope you're feeling better. A little bit of a rough show, I think. I think there was a little bit of a, ailments. I hope you're feeling better. I saw that over there. Playing Hooky. Hope you're doing well, brother. Just Cause. A couple hearts in the chat. Thank you, Just Cause, for modding down the forts for us. Playing Hooky. Geomancy Games is in the house. You can subscribe to his channel on YouTube. Just click his name and go right over there and hit the subscribe button. You also have Henry, who swings by from time to time. I saw Zulu in there. Was Zulu here today? I thought I saw Zulu earlier. But I appreciate the mods. Modding down the fort for us. World War Wit sent in a super chat that I almost missed. Why is that not showing up on this screen? There it is. World War says, you need a hug. I could always use a hug, you know. Actually, that's not true. But thank you for the offer. It's very nice of you. I think I'm pretty okay. I'm hugged. I'm pretty good on my hug quota, in fact. Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, that, my friends, is it for us on the day. We are going to jump right on over to Locals and on Rumble and on Twitter. But I hope that if you do not join us over there, that you do come back and you join us right here tomorrow for the regular show, right back here. Same time, same place, same location. I hope to see you here so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Rumble, Twitter, Locals, don't go anywhere. This camera's coming right back on in a minute.